I realized that a lot of what is happening in the world is due to a lack of intimacy. To me, it seems that's the most important thing. How can we create spaces where people can be their authentic self with themselves and each other? One of the programs we created was how to create intimacy in a work setting. Yeah. And it happens, and it's like magic. People experience real connection with other people.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Hey folks, welcome into this episode of the APC Recovery Cafe. My name is Art Wimberly. I'm a person grateful to be in long-term recovery. I'm a volunteer at the Addiction Prevention Coalition, and I'm here this morning with the Executive Director, Carrie Wimberly. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. So you've got a special guest in the studio this morning.
We do have a special guest.
Yeah, would you like to tell us about him?
Very excited. Yes, yeah. Dr. Joel Bennett is here with us today. Dr. Bennett has his PhD. He is the founder of Organization Wellness Learning Systems. I'm trying to think, was it 5 years ago we met? Maybe 6? Did we figure that out? Yeah. At CADCA, which is a national prevention conference that we go to every year. And we were actually in the market for looking to bring prevention into the workplace. So I went to a breakout of yours, and I called Art, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think I have found my person. So you have this organization, you've written several books, you've co-authored several books, you have been in the prevention and wellness space for longer than anybody that I know that I've come across, and probably understand prevention better. Like the science of prevention is confusing to people. So I know when I talk to you, you know what that is. But first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're in town for the National Prevention Network Conference. Yes. So what are you doing? What are you doing there?
I am moderating 2 panels discussion. Yeah. One on the 3 clients who've adapted our team awareness program, working with rural communities, semi-rural communities, and veterans. Wow. And the other one, which I'm really happy about, is Dr. Deborah Galvin was an employee at CSAP in their Division of Workplace Programs, and she passed away in December. So we're doing sort of a honorary review of her life. Wow. People, different researchers and people who worked with her. People don't know a lot about CSAP's Division of Workplace Programs, so we thought, let's do that. So yeah, I'm moderating those 2.
Awesome.
I noticed that you have a drink there for this morning. That's kind of the thing. Is that something you start a lot of mornings off with? Or?
In this cup was a nutty super grain smoothie with raspberry.
So knowing you like I do, I know health and wellness is important to you. So take us back. Like, first of all, where are you from originally?
I grew up in Far Rockaway, New York City, which is Queens, New York.
Okay.
It's the Rockaway Peninsula is the last stop on the A train, so it's the beach.
Wow.
I grew up on the beach.
At what point did this start? You know, this quest
started very, very early on. I mean, there's so many layers to the story. How do you begin?
Yeah.
You know, my parents divorced when I was 12. And it wasn't a happy marriage.
Yeah.
There was alcohol.
Yeah.
there was, my father was a sex addict, philanderer. And when he left, my mom began deteriorating. I tell this story all the time, and every time I do, it's so hard. So I grew up between the ages of 12 and before I left for college, seeing her with alcohol, gaining weight, depression. So it's like that had a major impact on me, still does, because my father passed away in 2017. And when I would visit him in the memory ward, he had advanced Alzheimer's. But he was still pretty, at different times, they get cogent and alert.
Yes.
He would say the worst thing I ever did was divorce your mother. And I remember one time visiting, and the nurse said to me, he talks about your mother all the time.
Wow.
And this was, 50 years later after another marriage and all this other stuff and other children, and all he could do was think about my mom.
Wow.
And so I think that layer of, powerful layer of how relationships gone awry have such an important impact on a child.
Yes.
And so for me, I have never been able to separate addiction from health and relationship.
Yep.
They just never made sense to me. And so for my whole career, when I see people, I do health and wellness. Well, what are you doing around addiction with that?
Yeah.
Or I do addiction.
Yeah.
Well, what are you doing around health and wellness? So in my mind, I see the world has gotten so fragmented in how it treats things.
Yes.
But the other thread to that, though, is that my mom, she was a legal stenographer. So after my dad left, we were pretty, I would say, lower middle class, high upper, we were not a very rich, we didn't have any money, hardly any money.
Right.
So she would go sometimes into Manhattan to take a job, take the train into the city. And whenever she did that, she was a different person. So I could see that work, having a sense of identity, having a sense of self-esteem, helped.
Yeah.
But it came from work.
Yeah.
So I started to understand more that the workplace is a powerful place for people to be healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't, and now, knowing now later, all the research that shows, if you're not of the people who are not in the workforce are at higher risk.
Yes.
Well, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So all of those things started to come together for me. So that's where it all began.
Right.
Early on.
Right.
But then there's so many other phases,
Wasn't there a period of time that you were connected to or traveled with Ann Wilson Schaaf?
Yeah, that's how I became, So I am a recovering romance addict, a relationship addict.
Yeah.
I don't identify as a sex addict.
Yes.
But I got a lot from going to SAA and SLAA, more SLAA. And so what happened was...
And tell people what that is.
SAA is Sex Addicts Anonymous.
Yep.
SLAA is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous.
Yep.
Which is really where the romance and relationship addiction, codependency.
Yeah.
So Art made a comment about Anne. Oh my God, she passed 2 years ago. So grateful for Anne. So I was struggling a lot through adolescence with relationships and into my 30s, really. because I would, fall in love,
Yeah.
give everything over, lose myself completely,
Yeah.
and thought that that's what I supposed to do.
Yes.
I mean, not only supposed. I mean, I was
Almost like that idea you mentioned about your mother of identity or self-esteem or image comes from that kind of
being with
that,
another person. Yeah. But also, I mean, music. I mean, every song that was in the
Yes.
60s and 70s
Yes.
and 80s,
Yes.
So
We used to have fun in recovery on big nights, group nights. We would have the top 10 codependent songs.
Yeah.
it's not hard to find.
Yes.
I can't live if living is without you.
A lot of material out there.
Yeah.
A lot of great material.
Yes.
Still love it.
Yes.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
So what happened was I thought, someone said, you might want to check out this book called Codependence Misunderstood. I forget the name of the book that Anne wrote. So I was living in Minnesota and I went to hear her talk. And I just and this was the thing. I had also another thread that I should mention is I really, in an early time in my life, got into spirituality. And I remember my mom brought home, or I don't know how it happened, one of her stints was with Penguin Books. She was Penguin Books. And I got a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the classic Hindu text, when I was in 7th grade or something. And I did a book report on that. And I just but I had already started looking in the library on different religions. So the reason I mentioned that is I started developing more in terms of my spiritual interests. Mm-hmm. And I actually started following a guru when I was 16 and went to a gathering and what happened was, so I was developing that, but I couldn't figure this relationship thing out.
Yes.
And I can realize, of course, that I couldn't figure the relationship thing out given all the baggage that I had from being in that family of origin.
Yes.
And it's even more complex than how I'm describing it. And so I kind of advanced because of my intellect and my spirituality in this area, but I couldn't figure out, why do I keep falling in and out of love? Why are these people leaving me?
Yeah.
Why can't I hold on to something? And I was just devastated, just emotional pain. And so I think, okay, I got to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so I heard Anne speak. And then I started going to her intensives, living in process. For those of you who don't know about Anne Wilson Schaaf, probably her most popular book is Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much. But the book and her work that really, there's so much there. But one of the main insights came from her book, When Society Becomes an Addict. And two things happened. One, I went to a retreat, and there were couples there, and this couple, who were both in recovery, started sharing with each other about their process in the group. And I had never in my entire life ever experienced on TV, in my relationships, anything that I had witnessed there, which was true, authentic. And I by the way, I had gotten my degree partly in clinical psych. I had gone to group sessions. I had done group work. I had processed group work. I had seen individuals in therapy, but I had never experienced raw, authentic sharing of love between two people.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know if I was just ready to see it.
Yeah.
And I lost it. I completely just started grieving. And that came because the work that Anne did was to create a safe space for people to do what she called deep process work. And that started me on a path, because I'd already been going to Al-Anon by that time, and I had started to realize that that authentic connection, that real intimacy, which I'd already been also interested in too. That's a whole nother track. There's so many layers to this. But I realized that a lot of what is happening in the world is due to a lack of intimacy.
Yeah.
And you know, Ronnie's here, Art's here, and we have our other podcasts that we do, and it just, to me, seems that's the most important thing. How can we create spaces where people can be their authentic self with themselves and each other? And that's where the healing always comes back to that. And so tomorrow, right, I'll be, on this panel, one of the programs we created was how to create intimacy in a work setting. Yeah. And it happens, and it's like magic.
Yeah.
People experience real connection with other people.
We're trying to put on a conference about workplace wellness, creating a mentally healthy workplace, I think is the subtitle. And so we actually use that as our fall fundraiser, but it truly is a conference where we bring in speakers. We've done just tons of key informant interviews with businesses, people in labor at the state level, and saying, okay, what's needed, and so we develop it off of that. But as we, open up registration and begin to promote it, and I'm talking to organizations all the time, some of them are very receptive and some are not. So, because what the answer is, I know I'm going to get you stirred up here. What I hear is, we have a EAP or whatever, and that handles all of that, so we're covered. Okay, so can you? I'm gonna absorb it as you speak, but can you speak into that as far as why it's important for organizations, businesses, to be thinking about this? Mentally healthy workspaces, spaces where we're aware of people that have substance use disorders or in recovery, or all of that, and how that has even been, how we're seeing that more post-pandemic.
One of the drivers that we saw in our research, and this was an anonymous survey of leaders, workplace leaders, both in the public sector and the private sector. And what they shared with us is that they may spend, on average, 40% of their time, on average, dealing with issues related to not their own, but their employees' stress, burnout, mental health, and general wellness issues. That is in the wake of COVID. What's important is leaders themselves are facing these stressors.
Right.
Business leaders. I had the chance to speak to the Next Generation Chief Human Resource Officer Summit at Deloitte. For people who don't know, Deloitte is a large corporate accounting firm that, more than that, they do a lot of consulting. And so I had a fireside chat with people who were in Fortune 100, right? Yeah. Chief Human Resource Officers.
Yeah.
And they pretty much said to me the same thing, that they're seeing these issues, and they're seeing it not only in their level, but above them, right?
Yeah.
So there's some concern about the mental health of their leaders. People aren't talking about this, what I just talked about. They're talking about employees.
Right.
They're not talking about leadership.
Yep.
And so as we know in prevention, there's this thing called stigma.
Right.
And stigma is even more entrenched in a corporate setting,
right,
where you have stakeholders.
Yep.
And you have to make sure you protect your image. And so we're at a point where on the other side, it's become difficult to hire employees.
Right.
Because employees after COVID, what people call the Great Resignation, which I think is a misnomer. It's the Great Disconnection. It's not the Great Resignation.
Right.
Because there's this sense that workaholic norms, burnout, just isn't worth it anymore. And you're seeing more of that in the younger generation.
Right.
So there's a move on, at least ostensible. It's just so important. It looks like, it feels like, and it smells like there's a more openness to this.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that people are actually rolling up their sleeves and doing much about it.
Right.
So why it's important, number one, is for the health and well-being of management and leaders.
Yes.
Number two, as a recruitment and retention piece.
Right.
But number three, which is the most important thing and goes back to my mother, giving people gainful employment where they can feel like they have a place to go where they can express themselves and their talents and their strengths is one of the best protective factors for mental health that exists.
Yes.
And for prevention of addiction problems, but also in the recovery world now we're seeing more and more how it helps those in recovery not relapse.
Early on, we said, okay, one of our core groups of people that we want to be constantly engaging in conversation and training is parents, grandparents, guardians, loved ones that are, caring about and talking to children that grow into adults. And so, okay, when I was new at APC, we're like, oh, we're going to have these parent conference because we've got so much information and so much information that I wish I had known with my own kids. And then as my kids began to struggle with substances, no clue. But we want to get to them, when the kids are in, preschool even, starting these conversations. Okay, we've got all this great information. We partnered with all these different organizations and put on this amazing parent conference, had all these great speakers, breakout sessions. And then we go, and there's 12 people there. We were expecting 130. What happened? So then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Parents are crazy busy time. Okay, they're doing sports, they're doing homework, they're doing, cheerleading, they're doing all kinds of stuff. A, they're busy. B, most of the ones we want to get to are not yet having a problem, or they don't know that there's a problem, and they don't think there's ever going to be a problem. And so they're not overly motivated to come, which I totally get. I've been a parent, or they know that there's a problem, or they sense there's a problem, but the stigma keeps them from showing up because they're rightly trying to protect their child, and they're feeling the stigma as well. So we're like, okay, we're going to have to figure out creative ways to do prevention education in places that the parents are, but they're not coming to an education event. And the workplace is a beautiful place to do that, community events and workplaces. So that's where our paths intersected, because we're like, we've got to get this information out, and we've got to get creative about it.
Right. Well, I feel your pain. I hear the issue. The difference for us is, and this has been a difficult one, for us it's not about information.
Yeah.
It's about connection. Connection trumps information.
Oh, absolutely.
1,000% every time when it comes to health and well-being.
Yep.
So I hear you. I'm not disagreeing.
Right.
There's great information, and parents, assuming that they are conscious and have time to implement, do need information.
Yeah.
But that's a big assumption.
Well, and I tell you, once we, when we developed Prevention Partners with you guys, pre-pandemic, and we were, getting the opportunity to be in more and more places, and people were actually, because I had to convince them to let me in. And really, the only way they let me in is because I told them we're talking about prevention. Okay, we're not going to come in there and talk about substance use. Yes.
Yeah, yep.
And so they'd say,
talk about wellness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we called it workplace wellness for, wellness in the workplace, wellness in the locker room, wellness in the whatever. But when they let you in, and, Art and I did a lot of these trainings together, it was amazing when, we would start out the conversation with, hey, we all have a relationship with substances, okay, and behaviors, okay? We just don't want those substances and behaviors to take the power. Like, we want to always be in the power seat. Framing the conversation that way, okay, amazingly, it's like everybody's like, that makes sense. And then afterwards, the lines of people that would come up and start talking to you about, hey, there's this whatever. I'm worried about the whatever.
That's
my
right.
neighbor, my
That's
friend.
And part of that was willingness to share personal stories.
Yes.
Which brought connection.
Yes.
A little bit more safety.
Yes, Art and I always go into those places saying, hey, let
So
us tell you about our family.
So you did, which trainings did you do? What did you actually use?
I don't know. What did we train on? I mean, you trained on team awareness.
Well,
No. It was an opioid.
Health consciousness.
Yes,
Yeah,
health consciousness. Yes.
And then resilience. was
Resilience
Yeah,
was
so
in there. Yes.
the two kind of programs that have ended up in later dissemination are fragments of the original program.
Right.
Because, let me just explain. So first, congratulations for getting out there and giving people an opportunity to hear this information. And then I also want to make sure you also then, I'm sure, referred them to the EAP and
Yes.
Other community resources.
Yes,
So,
because you taught us how to do that.
yeah, so for people listening, there's two parts. There's the connection part, getting people comfortable, reducing the stigma, and you do that by creating these ground rules, these confidentiality ground rules. Then once people start sharing, they may reveal something that's at a higher risk level. So Carrie and Art are not going to be able to take care of that, but they can then refer them
Yes.
to the benefit. And what's fascinating, just to close that loop, is that people will say, I didn't know I had an EAP.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I had those benefits.
Yep.
Right? But so what happens is you're breaking down that firewall
Yeah.
by making it an intimate connection to the resource that they told you they needed, that they didn't know they needed, because they didn't have the psychological safety to be able to even look inside themselves, to know that beyond the stigma, it's okay to be vulnerable.
Yes.
You did your job by helping them to come to that place of vulnerability.
When we end, we usually want our guests to have the last say. If you only got a minute, what would you want to tell folks, right? But before we do that, I do want to have you do a couple of things. One, how would they get in touch with your organization, the OWLS organization? But also, I'd like you to give them a link to the new book series that you're writing on time, because it's a big factor of what we're talking about. As you said earlier, a lot of the solutions that become problems later are fashioned around convenience and time and so forth. So you've done a lot of research in your writing, and you've got a podcast out and a community that you're creating. And Ronnie's laughing over there So tell them how to get through to OWLS.
I can't just have them contact you as my handler.
You could.
Probably wouldn't end
However,
well
I'm
for you.
notoriously inefficient. So
Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems, which is the organization that's done a lot of the prevention work and wellness work, recently married another organization called Presence Quest. And so we came together because we felt after all these years we needed to let everybody know that wellness without presence makes no sense. And there's a lot of health and wellness stuff out there that people are doing, but they're not necessarily present to what they're doing. So,
Going to be a new name?
no, we just got married. We respect each other's autonomy.
Okay.
So hyphenated.
A hyphenated
So
title.
there's presencequest.life,
Okay.
www.presence, not TS, but
Yeah.
NCE, quest.life is the other healthy time use, healthy orientation, spiritual health and time. And then organizationalwellness.com is our other place where people find out a lot about prevention. So those are our two different websites.
Great. Good. And then just take a minute and as you address the audience, not knowing exactly who all is going to be in there, what's the last thing you'd kind of like to give them going forward?
What's the last thing I would want to say?
Or what's the first thing you'd want
What's
to
the
say?
first thing I want to say?
What's the most important thing at this stage of your career and life and experience that you would just like to encourage folks with?
Aside from my grandchildren?
Yes, we could do those pictures too.
So, no, I believe that we just need to spend more time together and to have conversations that are off the clock and to come back to a place of finding our rhythm instead of rushing. And I have to be honest, coming clean here, I'm notoriously impatient, and yet I learn more patience by just allowing myself to be in the presence of other people learning and sharing. So I just encourage everyone to take more time with themselves, with each other, with their family. Try and get off the treadmill. Respect the Sabbath in whatever way that means, whatever that means to you, spend less time on your devices and more time face to face.
Deeper presence.
Yeah, out in nature.
Well, thank you so much for, I know you've been on the road, traveling in, got this conference coming up tomorrow, so thanks for spending your morning with us, and thanks for the work that you do.
Well, folks, thanks for joining us this time for this episode of the APC Recovery Cafe. And we hope to see you soon.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector, because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.